And so, how many times did you try calling her?
I called her 3 times, texted her about 3 times just to say, what's going on. Like because after I called her and texted her once, it's like maybe she was just busy. Like she had just gotten back. Like everybody's probably calling her from her trip. She just got back from Arizona, and I figured just she was just busy. But when her friend showed up, that's what was like. It registered like, all right, this isn't right.
I hope that she's somewhere safe right now and with the kids, but I mean, could she event? Could she just taken off? I don't know. But if somebody has her and they're not safe, like I want them back now. My kids are my life. I mean, those smiles light up my life. I just want them back. I just want them to come back. There's a reason why the Chris Watts case refuses to fade away. We have been told the investigation was thorough, but the reality is the district attorney closed this entire file in just 86 days. And in that rush to judgment, they missed a digital smoking gun. New testimony reveals that Chris was using WhatsApp to communicate with his mistress, a completely separate secret channel that law enforcement never even checked. So here's the question. If we combine thousands of those missing messages with the location data that places her right near the crime scene that morning, did the police just miss an accomplice? What I am about to share is based on the official discovery files, cell tower data, and new revelations from inside the prison. The 86-day rush that closed the case too fast. When I say the word prosecutor, what phrase immediately comes to your mind? You probably think of someone who is tough on crime, aggressive, maybe even a little overbearing. We expect them to be rigid, arrogant, and relentless in the pursuit of the absolute truth. But when we look at the Weld County District Attorney Michael Rourke and how he handled the Chris Watts case, that stereotype falls apart completely. So let's talk about the number that haunts this entire investigation. 86. On the 6th of November 2018, Chris Watts formally accepted a plea deal. That deal, approved by DA Rourke himself, was finalized just 86 days after the crimes were committed on August 13th. Think about that for a second. We are talking about a quadruple homicide, the annihilation of an entire family, and the state decided to wrap it up in less than 3 months. The thing is, in complex murder cases, especially ones involving this level of deception, investigators usually need months, sometimes years, just to fully decrypt and analyze digital evidence. They need to subpoena records, recover deleted data, cross-reference cell tower pings, and build a timeline that is airtight. But here, they stopped. They hit the brakes the moment Chris said, "I did it." And that is a massive problem. Because of that rush to secure a conviction, the Weld County District Attorney's Office has refused every single request for a full and complete investigation into what else might have happened that night. They acted like the conviction was the end of the story. But anyone who has spent time researching true crime knows that a confession is often just the beginning. What happened next was a discovery dump. They released nearly 2,000 pages of documents and hours of footage to the public. And this is where the cracks started to show. As the true crime community began combing through those files, we found glaring mistakes, omissions, and failures that exposed just how improper and incomplete this investigation really was, which means they missed things, big things. The reason this matters is because by closing the case so quickly, they left the door wide open for questions about who else might be involved. We know that the district attorney has continued to receive new and credible information concerning Nicole Kessinger's possible involvement, yet despite the ongoing barrage of requests to look into her role, he has refused them all. Meanwhile, we saw law enforcement handle Nicole Kessinger with kid gloves. While Chris was in the interrogation room getting grilled, Nicole was miles away speaking to the FBI in a park or over the phone. They never truly pressed her. They never put her in the hot seat and demanded to know why her phone was pinging in Frederick that morning. They never asked the hard questions about her internet search history because they were too busy high-fiving each other over the plea deal. At this point, I started questioning the motive behind the speed. What struck me was how desperate they were to close this case, even if it meant leaving questions unanswered. It felt like they were more interested in a win than in the truth. And this is important. Chris Watts will always bear sole responsibility for his own actions. He is the monster who took those lives. But our analysis is about the pursuit of justice. Justice isn't just about locking up the guy who pulled the trigger. It is about knowing exactly how and why it happened, and if anyone else helped him load the gun. When you look at the timeline, it becomes undeniable. The plea deal was signed before they even finished processing all the data. They essentially chose to remain blind to any evidence that might complicate the lone wolf theory. They wanted a neat, tidy ending. But life isn't neat, and this case certainly isn't tidy. By settling for 86 days, D.A. Rourke didn't just close a case, he buried the potential for a wider conspiracy. He chose to ignore the new evidence that has the potential to break this case wide open, information that was never previously known or disclosed by law enforcement since the arrest. So as we peel back the layers today, remember that we are doing the job that the district attorney refused to do. We are looking at the messages they didn't read, the apps they didn't check, and the accomplice they might have missed. Two timelines that sounded rehearsed. So let's take you inside the Frederick Police Department. It is the evening of August 14th, barely 24 hours after Shanann and the girls supposedly vanished into thin air. Chris Watts walks into the interrogation room to sit down with Detective Coder. Now, usually when a husband comes in to talk about his missing family, you expect absolute chaos. You expect a man who is frantic, crying, hyperventilating, or maybe even unable to think straight because his pregnant wife and two little girls are gone. You expect a mess. But that is not what happened. What I found was a detail that actually sends a chill down my spine every time I review the footage. Chris Watts wasn't just sitting there, he was prepared. He walks in and he pulls out a piece of paper, a handwritten note. Think about that for a second. A man who supposedly just woke up to an empty house, who has been frantically calling friends and family all day, somehow found the time to sit down and write out a meticulous, minute-by-minute timeline of his entire morning. He looks at Detective Coder and he starts reading from it like he's giving a presentation at a safety meeting, rather than pleading for the lives of his children. He says 5 o'clock in the morning. That's when I made my protein shake. 5:15, I went outside and backed my truck up. 5:30, that's when I went to work. The thing is, this level of detail is completely unnatural. When people are traumatized or panicked, their memory gets fuzzy. They remember emotions, they remember big moments, but they don't remember the exact minute they put oatmeal in a bowl or loaded a water jug. But Chris did. He had it all scripted out. It was too clean. It was too organized. And we know Chris was not naturally this organized of a person. And this is where it gets terrifying. When we dig into the discovery dump, specifically page 942, we find another timeline. This one didn't come from Chris. It came from Nicole Kessinger. When she spoke to investigators weeks later, she provided a breakdown of her interactions with Chris and the events of those days. What I found was that her timeline and his timeline didn't just match, they mirrored each other. It was almost a forensic level match. The times he said he called her, the time she said they spoke, the specific details of their normal morning, it was all perfectly synchronized. Which tells us something very dark was going on. How is it possible that a man who just strangled his wife and smothered his daughters has the presence of mind to memorize a script that fits perfectly with his mistress? And how does she, weeks later, recall those mundane details with the exact same precision? In my experience, when two suspects tell a story that fits together this perfectly, it's not the truth. It's a rehearsal. It means they got their stories straight. It implies that before the police ever knocked on that door, Chris and Nicole may have already decided exactly what they were going to say. The problem is, the police never treated it as a rehearsal. They treated Chris's timeline as a helpful tool, and Nicole's timeline as corroboration. They didn't stop to ask, wait a minute, why do you both sound like you're reading from the same screenplay? And then you have to look at Chris's behavior while he reads that note. He's not making eye contact. He's glued to that paper because he knows if he looks up, if he deviates from the script even for a second, the lie falls apart. He's terrified of slipping up. That piece of paper was his lifeline. It was the only thing keeping his mask of the innocent father from slipping off. We also know something else about Chris's personality. He was a follower. Throughout his life, he followed the strong women he was with. First his mother, then Shanann, and at this moment in time, he was following Nicole Kessinger. So when I see that detailed list, I don't see Chris's handwriting. I see Nicole's influence. I see a man doing exactly what he was told to do to cover his tracks. At this point, I started questioning everything about the crime of passion theory. Crimes of passion are messy, they're chaotic, they don't come with handwritten notes and synchronized alibis. This level of coordination screams premeditation. It screams that they knew exactly what the narrative needed to be to convince the world that Shanann just took off. It's a strange coincidence, isn't it? The two people involved in an illicit affair in the middle of a murder investigation just so happened to have their stories straight down to the minute? I don't buy it. And honestly, I don't think you should either. So, I have to ask you, do you think this was just a coincidence? Do you think a panicked man and his oblivious mistress just so happened to remember the exact same timestamps? Or do you think they agreed on this script before the police ever got involved? Tell me below.
The backdoor slip no one followed up on. At this point, I need you to lean in, because we are about to look at what I believe is the single biggest slip-up Chris Watts made during his entire first interview. We know that Chris is a terrible liar. We watched him stumble through his TV interviews, smiling when he should have been crying. But in the interrogation room, buried under hours of deflection and denial, he accidentally handed law enforcement the keys to the entire case. He just didn't realize it at the time. The police were pressing him on a logical impossibility. They had the footage from his neighbor, Nate Tranastic. That camera pointed directly at the Watts driveway. It showed Chris leaving at 5:26 in the morning, but it showed absolutely no one else leaving that house. No Shannon, no Bella, no Celestia. So Detective Coder asks him the million-dollar question: how could she have left the house? And that is when Chris's subconscious takes over. Instead of just saying, "I don't know," which would be the smart answer, he tries to solve the crime for them. He offers a theory. He says, only way she could have left the house is if somebody picked her up, but it would have to be from the back. He goes on to elaborate, painting a vivid picture. He suggests that maybe a friend backed up in the back and said, "Hey, let's go," and they just hopped in. He even mentions that the front door had a latch that would have kept the kids inside, reinforcing that the front was impossible. The thing is, Chris is right about the geography. The front of the house was under constant surveillance by Nate's camera, but the back of the house that faced Verbena Court, it was a wide open road that ran directly behind their fence. It was a complete blind spot. There were no cameras there. If someone wanted to get into that house unseen, or if someone wanted to slip out without ending up on the evening news, the back gate was the only way to do it. Which means Chris Watts just admitted that he had already thought about how to evade the cameras. But here is the problem with his theory. We know Shannon did not leave through the back door. Her shoes were by the front door. Her phone was in the couch cushions. She did not walk out to a waiting car on Verbena Court. So why did Chris bring it up? Why put that image in the detectives' heads? I believe he wasn't talking about Shannon leaving. I believe he was accidentally describing how someone else arrived. Think about the psychological pressure he is under. He knows he is guilty. He knows the front door is watched. He is desperately trying to construct a narrative that fits the physical evidence. By pointing to the back door, he's telling us that he knows that is the weak point in the house's security. He knows that is the only safe entry and exit point. And remember what we talked about earlier. We know Nicole Kessinger's phone pinged in Frederick that morning. We know she was in the area. If Chris acted entirely alone, if he killed his family and loaded them into his truck in the garage, he wouldn't need to worry about the back door. He wouldn't need to invent a scenario about a car backing up to the fence. The fact that his mind went there suggests that he was hyper-aware of that blind spot. What struck me here was the specificity. He didn't just say maybe she walked away. He said someone backed up to the back. He's describing a vehicle. He's describing a pickup. Is it possible that he is recalling a memory, not inventing a lie? Is he remembering seeing a car on Verbena Court that morning? When you combined this slip with the missing WhatsApp messages and the synchronized timelines, the picture starts to get very crowded. The lone wolf theory relies on Chris being the only actor on the stage. But right here, in his own words, he's describing a stage entrance that no one was watching. He practically drew a map for the police. He said, "Look here, look at the back. That is where the secret is." And sadly, because they were so focused on getting a confession from him, they never stopped to look at the tire tracks he might have been pointing toward. So I have to ask you, when you hear Chris describe a car backing up to the rear of the house, does that sound like a man making up a random lie? Or does it sound like a man who is subconsciously remembering exactly how his accomplice got into the house? Let me know what you think. The digital black hole police never checked. And then the bomb exploded. It did not come from a press conference, it did not come from the district attorney's office, and it certainly did not come from the FBI. It came from the most unlikely source imaginable, the inside of a prison cell at the Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. For years, the narrative of this case has been dominated by a single piece of technology, the secret calculator app. If you followed this case in the news, you know exactly what I'm talking about. We were told that Chris Watts hid his double life behind an innocuous-looking icon that was actually a vault for his secrets. It became the focal point of the media's obsession with his deception. It was the smoking gun that proved his infidelity. But months ago, a man named Dylan Tolman, Chris's former cellmate and neighbor, came forward with a revelation that completely rewrites the digital history of this case. During a candid conversation, Tolman admitted that Chris and Nicole were not just using the calculator, they were communicating using WhatsApp. The thing is, when you stop and think about the implications of that statement, the entire investigation starts to look terrifyingly fragile. The police spent weeks dissecting the secret calculator app. They knew about it. They wrote reports about it. We know that Chris was receiving nude images and storing them there. But in the nearly 2,000 pages of the discovery dump, there's a glaring, catastrophic omission. I've combed through those documents and I cannot find a single mention of a subpoena for WhatsApp. There's no forensic report analyzing WhatsApp logs. There's no request to Facebook, which owns WhatsApp, to preserve data. It's a ghost. The problem is this isn't just a minor oversight. It's a digital black hole. You have to understand how digital forensics works to grasp the magnitude of this failure. Standard text messages are logged by your carrier, Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile. Even if you delete them from your phone, the police can often get the logs from the company. But WhatsApp is different. WhatsApp uses end-to-end encryption. That means the messages are scrambled in a way that even the company itself often cannot read them. The only way to get that data is to have physical access to the phone, to open the app and to download the history before it is deleted. But the police didn't do that. They focused on the calculator app because that's where the pictures were. They stopped digging. They assumed they had found the source of the secrets. They didn't know, or perhaps they didn't want to look, for the second layer of secrecy, which means we're missing thousands of lines of dialogue in a premeditated murder investigation. The planning phase is everything. That's where the intent lives. That's where the logistics are discussed. If Chris and Nicole were using WhatsApp to keep their conversations off the main phone bill, what were they talking about that was so secret it couldn't even go in the secret calculator? Were they talking about the layout of the house? Were they talking about the schedule of the kids? Were they talking about the back door that Chris so conveniently mentioned in the interview, the one blind spot in the neighbor's surveillance? This revelation invalidates the entire timeline the prosecution sold to the public. They told us they knew everything. They told us they had the full picture. But how can you claim to have the full picture when you're missing the primary method of communication between the killer and his mistress? And let's look at Nicole Kessinger's behavior with this new context. We know from the discovery files that on the afternoon of August 14th, Nicole was frantically searching the internet for information on whether cops can trace text messages. Why does this matter if she was just an innocent girlfriend who'd been lied to? Why was she terrified of the police seeing her messages? An innocent person wants the police to see everything so they can clear their name. A guilty person worries about digital footprints. If she knew they were using WhatsApp, she also knew that the police had missed it. She knew that as long as the investigators were distracted by the shiny object, the calculator app, the real secrets were safe in the cloud, encrypted and out of reach. We know she deleted her search history. We know she wiped data. And because law enforcement never served a warrant for WhatsApp specifically, whatever was said in those chats is likely gone forever. The district attorney, Michael Rook, made the decision to close this case in just 86 days. He called it a win for justice. But finding out about this secret app 7 years later proves that it wasn't a win. It was a rush job. It proves that the thorough investigation was actually filled with massive holes that you could drive a truck through. So I have to ask you, the police completely missed WhatsApp, the primary communication tool between the killer and his mistress. If we could recover those deleted messages today, do you think Chris Watts would still be the only person sitting in a prison cell? Yes or no? Tell me below.
The cell tower ping that put her near the scene. Meanwhile, while we are left wondering about the deleted secrets inside WhatsApp, the physical infrastructure of the world around us was telling a completely different story. You can delete an app, and you can wipe a search history, but you cannot easily trick a cell tower. And on the morning of August 13th, the cell tower data was screaming something that the prosecution seemingly chose to ignore. Let's go back to that timeline. We know that in the early hours of the morning, Chris Watts was loading his truck. He was driving his wife and daughters to Survey 319, a desolate oil site, to dispose of them like trash. It is the most critical window of time in the entire case. And where was Nicole Kessinger? According to her initial narrative, she was miles away. She claimed she was at her own home getting ready for a normal day, completely oblivious to the horror unfolding. She painted a picture of herself as a distant girlfriend, physically removed from the chaos. But the data tells us that was a lie. Buried in the discovery files is a piece of technical evidence that should have stopped the investigation in its tracks. On the morning of August 13th, at the exact time the crime was being covered up, Nicole Kessinger's phone pinged off a tower in Frederick, Colorado. For those who don't know the geography, Frederick is not a big city. It is a small community, and that specific tower covers the area directly surrounding the Watts family home. This puts her in the red zone. Why was her phone communicating with a tower right next to the crime scene when she claimed she was nowhere near it? If she was at home in North Glen or heading to work, her phone should have been pinging towers miles away. But it wasn't. It was there. It was watching. This evidence aligns terrifyingly well with the backdoor theory we discussed earlier. If Chris was worried about the front camera and he knew the back was a blind spot, having an accomplice or at least a witness in the immediate vicinity makes his slip about the car backing up to the fence feel less like a theory and more like a memory. And then the behavior shifts from suspicious presence to active panic. If the morning ping places her at the scene of the cover-up, her internet activity later that day reveals her state of mind. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon on August 14th, while the police were swarming the Watts house and the media was setting up camp, Nicole Kessinger wasn't searching for how to help find a missing person. She wasn't searching for hope. She was searching for survival. According to Detective Prill's data report, Nicole Kessinger spent that afternoon frantically Googling, "Can cops trace text messages?" and "How long do phone companies keep text messages?" Let's be real for a second. If you are an innocent woman who just found out your boyfriend's family is missing, your first instinct is concern. You might worry about him, you might worry about the kids, but you do not worry about your own text messages unless those messages contain something that incriminates you. Why was she so terrified of the police reading her texts? If she was just the other woman, the worst thing the police would find is proof of an affair, something they already knew about. Shame is not a crime, but she wasn't acting like someone hiding shame. She was acting like someone hiding evidence. She knew the police were coming. She knew they would eventually look at her phone, and instead of preserving evidence to help find a missing pregnant woman and 2 toddlers, she was researching how to destroy it. Detective Prill noted in his report that she deleted all of these searches and she deleted her messages frequently in the days following the murders.
This is what the law calls consciousness of guilt. When you combine the ping in Frederick with the desperate attempt to scrub her digital footprint, the innocent mistress narrative completely disintegrates. An innocent person does not ping at the crime scene. An innocent person does not Google how to hide from the police on the day the bodies are being hidden. The police had the location data, they had the search history, they had the contradictions. Yet for reasons that remain baffling to this day, they never treated her as a suspect. They treated her as a witness who just so happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Even though the wrong place was the crime scene and the wrong time was the murder. The ping was the silent witness that placed a second person in the shadow of that house, and by ignoring it, the investigation didn't just fail to connect the dots, it erased them. The signal was there, clear as day, beaming through the air over Frederick, proving that Chris Watts may have been the one with his hands on the wheel, but he was certainly not the only one watching the clock. When the lone wolf theory starts to break. So, let's put it together. We have spent this entire journey turning over stones that the investigation left untouched. And when you stop looking at these details in isolation, when you stop seeing them as coincidences and start seeing them as a pattern, the image of the lone wolf killer begins to dissolve. What emerges instead is a picture that is far more complex and infinitely more disturbing. Let's look at the 4 pillars of doubt we have uncovered. First, we have the script. We have a timeline from Chris Watts and a timeline from Nicole Kessinger that match with forensic precision. 2 people supposedly on opposite sides of a missing person investigation recalling the exact same minute-by-minute details of their morning. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens by design. That is a rehearsal. Second, we have the back door. In his most vulnerable moment in the interrogation, Chris practically drew a map for the police. He pointed them to the one blind spot in the house's security, the back gate on Verbena Court that avoided the neighbor's camera. He told them exactly how a second person could enter or exit without leaving a trace. Third, we have the ping, the digital witness that refuses to lie. While Nicole Kessinger claimed to be miles away, detached from the morning's horror, her phone pinged off a tower in Frederick, placing her right in the shadow of the crime scene at the exact time the cover-up was happening. And fourth, we have the ghost channel, the revelation that they were communicating via WhatsApp, an encrypted, secret app that law enforcement never subpoenaed, never read, and never recovered. When you stack these 4 facts on top of each other, the weight of them crushes the idea that Chris Watts acted entirely alone. This is the part I couldn't get past. The evidence points to involvement, yet the investigation stopped at lone wolf. It feels like we're looking at a puzzle where the edges are straight, but the middle is missing. The authorities were so relieved to have a confession that they ignored the strings that were clearly being pulled from behind the curtain. Now, I want to be very clear about what I mean here. I am not necessarily saying Nicole Kessinger wrapped her hands around anyone's throat. I am not saying she was the one who physically took those lives. But the law is very specific about this type of culpability. We have a legal concept in this country often referred to as the Charles Manson precedent. Charles Manson never actually killed anyone with his own hands at the Tate LaViana murders. He wasn't the one holding the knife. He wasn't the one pulling the trigger. But he was charged, convicted, and sentenced to life in prison. Why? Because the law recognized that his influence, his direction, and his coercion were the central cause of those horrific crimes. The law understands that the person who plants the seed of murder is just as dangerous as the person who harvests it. We have to ask the uncomfortable question. Chris Watts pulled the trigger, but who loaded the gun? Who planned it? Who created the pressure cooker that made Chris feel like his family was the only obstacle to a new life? We know Nicole told Chris he had to choose between her and Shanann. We know she sent him nude photos and engaged in intense conversations while he was away, keeping the pressure high. But did that pressure evolve into a plan? When you look at the deleted internet searches about police tracing texts, the secret apps, and the synchronized alibis, it suggests that this wasn't just a husband snapping in a fit of rage. It looks like a husband executing a strategy that required 2 people to construct but was designed for only one person to take the fall. Influence is a powerful weapon. If someone guides you, encourages you, or helps you figure out how to avoid the cameras, they are part of the mechanism of death. The evidence suggests that Nicole Kessinger may have been involved in directing or inspiring Chris to commit this crime. The prosecution wants us to believe that Chris Watts was a mastermind who fooled everyone, yet simultaneously an idiot who didn't know how cameras worked. But the truth is likely somewhere in the middle. Chris was the instrument of destruction, but the sheet music he was playing from might have been written by someone else. And while he will die in prison, the person who might have helped him tune the instrument is still out there, free to live a life that Shanann, Bella, and Cece were denied.
A closed file, and the questions still open. We have spent this entire deep dive peeling back the layers of a case that most of the world believes is closed. We have looked at the synchronized timelines, the convenient slip-ups about the back door, the damning cell tower pings, and the secret communication channels that were never investigated. And after all of that, we are left staring at one number that refuses to go away. 86. The Weld County District Attorney closed the file on the murders of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico in just 86 days. Think about the magnitude of that. A quadruple homicide involving a pregnant woman and 2 toddlers was wrapped up faster than most people pay off a car loan. The prosecution sold this speed as a victory. They told us it was about sparing the family the pain of a trial. But looking at the evidence we have uncovered today, evidence that was left gathering dust in the files, it does not feel like a victory. It feels like a shortcut. The rush to close this case has left a massive void in justice. By prioritizing a conviction over a complete investigation, the authorities chose to leave questions unanswered. They chose to ignore the shadows in the background so they could shine a spotlight on the monster in the foreground. But here is the lesson we have to learn from this. Crime is changing. Criminals are not just leaving fingerprints on door handles anymore. They are leaving digital footprints in the cloud. Technology has evolved, and the way we investigate murder has to evolve with it. When law enforcement chooses to ignore a platform like WhatsApp simply because it is encrypted or too hard to access, they are effectively giving sophisticated criminals a free pass. Ignoring that app is not just a mistake, it is a systemic failure. It tells every potential accomplice out there that as long as you stay off the main phone lines, as long as you use a third-party app and delete your history, the police will probably just look the other way if they get a confession from the main guy. We cannot accept that standard of justice. So this is my call to action. It is time for the Weld County District Attorney, Michael Rourke, to answer the questions that have been screaming from these files for 7 years. We are not asking for Chris Watts to be released. He is exactly where he belongs, and he should never breathe free air again. But justice is not a zero-sum game. Holding Chris accountable does not mean we have to give a free pass to anyone who helped him. We are asking for the DA to swallow his pride and reopen the digital investigation, subpoena the WhatsApp records, analyze the full scope of location data with modern technology, do the job that should have been done in 2018. We owe it to the Oruzga family. We owe it to the memory of those beautiful little girls, and we owe it to the truth. Because if there is someone else out there who helped plan the destruction of this family, someone who encouraged it, directed it, or helped cover it up, they are walking among us right now, free, believing they got away with it. And that thought should keep every single one of us awake at night. And this leads me to one final haunting thought. We tend to think that when we delete a message, it's gone. But in the digital age, nothing is ever truly gone. Those thousands of missing WhatsApp messages between Chris and his mistress, they might not be on his phone and they might not be on hers, but are they sitting on a server somewhere in a data center backed up in a cloud account that no one has the password to? Is the smoking gun still out there, just waiting for a detective with enough courage to go look for it?
This case is closed on paper, but in the court of public opinion and in the pursuit of the absolute truth, the file on the Watts family murders is still wide open. I want to turn this over to you now. We have covered a lot of heavy ground today. We've talked about secret apps, location pings, and the possibility of an accomplice. So I want to hear your final verdict. Do you believe the lone wolf theory that Chris acted completely alone, or do you believe the evidence proves he had help? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for going on this journey with me. I know this case is painful. I know it's dark. But the reason we do this, the reason we keep digging, is because the victims no longer have a voice. So we have to be theirs. I appreciate every single one of you for watching, for listening, and for caring about the truth. I'll see you in the next investigation. Stay safe.